This is Meet the Author, and I'm your host, Tigner Rand. Meet the Author is part of Rolling Out's book club series where I talk with authors about their new books, projects, and of course, what inspires them to write. Between birth and our death, there is a space of time often referenced as life. Also, it is represented by between birth and death. It is also known as the dash. The dash is a representation of life itself. Dance is the movement of the body in a rhythmic way, typically to music. Ballet is also an art form created by the movement of body through a form of dance, which is typically a theatrical performance on the stage in front of an audience. Today, joining me is a phenomenal woman who has performed on many stages of life where she would have been able to balance life, her career, and her passion for dance. Lauri Fitz-Pegado has also penned a memoir called Dancing in the Dash, My Story of Empowerment, Diplomacy, and Resilience. In Lauri's book, she explores her life's journey and how her training in dance helped establish her skill balance, endurance, and perseverance. Lauri also reveals insight and observations about history and consequences about opportunity and obstacles. After years of working in government and civil service capacity, Lauri returned to her passion of dance. Her history of ballet training and performing with Capitol Ballet, Vassar Dance Theater, and the Ballet of Santo Domingo. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome her seat at the table with me and Meet the Author, Lauri Fitz-Pegado. How are you doing today, Lauri?
I'm doing great, Tigner. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be on your program. So here I am.
Yes. Before we get started, this is the book, Dancing Within the Dash. It is currently available on blackbookstore.com. So if you have not picked it up, here's a great opportunity to pick up a copy. It is a great read. And if it's not too much, can you give us a synopsis as to why you decided to write your book, Dancing in the Dash, My Story of Empowerment, Diplomacy, and Resilience?
Thanks for that opportunity. First, I will say I intended for this book to be something for family and friends. And as it evolved, I realized and was convinced by friends, Karen Cox, with whom I attended Vassar, who had always encouraged me to write a book, and then the wonderful Faith Childs, who is an agent in New York, who happened to see a chapter and encouraged me to continue writing, and that this was an important story to put out there. And as I wrote, I recognized that it embraced universal themes. It was current in terms of things that were happening in our country over the last few years, as well as my long history. And it would have appeal, hopefully, and lessons learned. And it would be something that people would identify with, whether young, old, black, white, people of color, people in the United States and abroad, because I've done a lot of work internationally and traveled internationally. So I thought maybe this is something that's meant to be and something that will have resonance for many. And that's why I wrote the book.
Great. That's it, which I can see all of that throughout the book. There was one thing I found, I like the title, and I also like how you were able to use the parallels of life and dance through each chapter. So was that intentional to be able to kind of show the similarities of life and dancing and importance of balance, and you use various terminology of dancing throughout each chapter, kind of to bring the picture closer to home?
It was definitely intentional. I wanted to write a memoir that was a little different, perhaps, and that I call a creative memoir. I believe that dance and ballet specifically has been so critical as a core and as a leitmotif theme and as something that has given me strength, resilience, power, and that to reflect this in other arts as well, because I include poetry, I include some music, but that ballet has really been my cornerstone, has been something that has helped me, whether I was dancing, whether I was a diplomat, whether I was a corporate exec, in my life as an African-American woman, and that it's an art form that perhaps is not appreciated as broadly, ballet, and recognized for what it instills in young people.
Yeah.
Discipline, perseverance, all of those things that help us anywhere in our life. And I wanted to tell that story.
You bring up a good point. Why is it so that, especially in the Black community, ballet is not looked upon as as something that young girls should even attempt to, learn or participate in?
Well, I hope that's changing. And I grew up in a school called Jones Haywood School of Ballet that was created by two Black women in 1941. We celebrated our 80th anniversary in 2021 this year as it closes. And those women recognized the importance of the skills, the life skills that could be instilled in young Black children in the community, because one of them could not become a ballet dancer because of segregation. She was from Boston. And the fact that now I teach at that school in my second chapter, I've gone back to teach at the school where I grew up, and I teach Black girls, young Black girls, some of whom will become professional dancers and some of whom will take those skill sets in whatever they do in the rest of their life, like I have. So I also advise a dance school called the Dance Institute of Washington. I am working on issues of diversity and inclusion in ballet with the school in Canada. And I believe that with Misty Copeland out perhaps as the imagery for many young Black dancers, I had Arthur Mitchell, who was the creator of the Dance Theater of Harlem, perhaps as my role model and someone that he was an icon of my time, and perhaps Misty is the icon of today. So I'm hoping that'll change, Tigner, that young Black folks, women, girls and boys, will have the opportunity.
You mentioned Misty's name. Misty, it was one of the phenomenal first Black African-Americans who was a principal ballet dancer, like I said, of our time. Then I know over the Christmas, we had young girl named Charlotte Nabrice, who was the lead character for the Nutcracker, first time. So I'm hoping that this won't be we won't continue having these conversations saying the first Black of whatever, especially in the art form of dance, would be the first, and especially in ballet, because I'm sure you heard it over the years. What were some of the negative connotations they would say about Black girls and why they could not be ballerinas or dancing ballet?
Right.
Legs too big.
Yeah, right. Legs too big, body not thin enough. The things that actually Arthur Mitchell is one of the first that we can look at debunked when he formed Dance Theater of Harlem. But I will say to you, Tigner, while I am so supportive and I admire and respect the Misties of the world and the firsts, in many of the smaller companies and larger companies, that now we have Black dancers in principal roles of ballets. But I will say in my book, one of my efforts is to pay tribute to all of the Black ballerinas who preceded in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There were Black ballerinas and there were Black male dancers who never got any exposure or any credit for their fabulous work. And many of them had to dance in Europe because of the discrimination here in this country. I think like many artists, musicians, dancers, actors, they had more opportunity in Europe, which is kind of ironic, because of discrimination, segregation in this country. And it wasn't because they weren't fabulous dancers. They were, many of them. And I try to name them and I try to talk a bit about them. And one is a colleague of mine who now runs Jones Haywood, who was the first Black ballerina in the 70s to compete in international ballet competition, Sandra Fortune Green.
That's right. You did have a chapter about Sandra. Exactly. Tell us a little bit about Sandra and what, some of the things that she accomplished during her time. Just to lead in kind of example of what you're talking about.
I grew up with Sandra at Jones Haywood, was in class with Sandra, performed with Sandra in the Capitol Ballet Company, which was a Washington, D.C. Black ballet company, created by Miss Jones and Miss Haywood from the school. It was a pre-professional company. We performed at HBCUs. We performed in the Washington area. And we really did expose, whether it was at Fisk, at Howard University, back in those days, 60s and in early 70s, we did expose Black folks to ballet. And Sandra performed with our company. She went on to compete in Moscow, Varna. She also danced briefly with the Washington Ballet here in DC, which at that time was quite segregated, run by Mary Day. She might have been the first Black dancer at the Washington Ballet. And she went there on a dare because there had been a piece on, I think it was on 60 Minutes, interviewing Mary Day, who was the head of the Washington Ballet, as to a question about Black dancers, Black ballet dancers. And her response was that the Black body wasn't conducive to ballet. And Sandra, who was winning international competitions, went to say, Ms. Day, I'd like to dance with your company. Here's a body that perhaps is conducive to classical ballet. So we've had experiences in DC, in the country, throughout the country. And I think now people are speaking up and looking very intensely at the issue of discrimination in ballet and the importance of diversity, and also the importance of cultural competence in dealing with young students of color, because teaching ballet and teaching dance to those students who come from a different environment, perhaps marginalized communities, economic issues, issues at home, we have to approach those students holistically, not just in the studio. And that's one of the things I'm committed to and that I learned at Jones Haywood. And I think this country and the world has to embrace the talents that are equal of African-American and others of color in the ballet world and in the dance world and in the art world.
You just mentioned holistically approaching Black students or who come to class. What are some of the things that you've learned and that you try to implement through your teaching and programs that you offer?
What I do as a teacher, and also at Jones Haywood, at Dance Institute of Washington, at Howard University, at Duke Ellington School, I think that we have a knowledge as people of color of why family, parental support, recognizing, for example, during COVID, we were teaching on Zoom, and these students were at home. And they didn't necessarily have the space that they needed. They were taking class in their bedrooms. They were in the kitchen. They were in spaces where they didn't have the privacy, the focus. And I was so proud of these students who were able to concentrate in those circumstances, and recognizing this when ballet has kind of been an elitist, upper class. It's expensive to buy the equipment, the point shoes that cost over $100, the outfits, the leotard, the tights. It's an expensive art form. So understanding this, the economic challenges, the familial challenges. Sometimes these children have to take care of their younger siblings. On Zoom, we had one student who was looking away from the camera and was being reprimanded by the teacher. Would you please focus? Will you look straight ahead? Will you not look at the camera? And she says, I'm watching my siblings. I'm babysitting.
Wow.
So those types of things that are so important to grasp come from cultural understanding. And I call it cultural competence. And that's the terminology that's being used. And many white teachers don't have that because they haven't lived that experience. So it's not just a matter of teaching technique or teaching performance. It's also understanding the entire background, the family, needing to educate parents, because the support for becoming a dancer really requires commitment by that parent to get that child to class every day, to get to rehearsals, to understand the emotional challenges as well as the physical. So this is an education that we need among people of color in order to support the child who wants to become a professional dancer.
Yeah, you said a mouthful, but it's all true. Even in the classroom, my mother used to talk about, she was a teacher, and she talked about that. She taught when it was segregated and desegregated, and how it was more difficult for white teachers to be able to deal with Black students because they didn't know how to deal with that. Very similar, that Junior had to take, it didn't have running water last night, but you didn't know that, or any lights. And they came to school with an attitude or mixed emotions about life, and you're reprimanding them. So you got to know how to deal with them. And that's been going on for over 50 years. And here it is now, you're still talking about it today. And this time we talked about it in dance.
Absolutely. I'm involved and have been involved in designing and will be part of the implementation of a conference that's called Addressing Racialization in Ballet. And that conference comes up on the 28th, 29th of January, and the 4th and 5th of February. It's virtual. And we're doing it in conjunction with the Canadian National Ballet School. So understanding that there are people out there who recognize the implicit bias and all of the things that go with not really having the competence to deal with incorporating and having equality and diversity and inclusion, to have Black students and students of color to enter companies, to enter schools that are white schools. And so this is a mission that I'm on, along with a lot of other folks. There's 7 other ballet teachers in DC, Black, who teach students of color. And we've come together in a group to share ideas, to bring all of our students together who don't know each other, all of these students of color, to have guest teachers who are former dancers and who are at institutions like Juilliard, where there is the first Black dance director, Alicia Graf Mack. And so having these things and having them exposed as young people will help to bring them along. And we talk with the parents. We have talk sessions after the classes. So I'm really enjoying giving back, using my own experience, not just in dance, but in diplomacy and life, to bring all those skills to bear now with the arts and with artists and performing artists and students and dance, visual arts. So that's what I'm doing now that I'm retired, Tigner.
This sounds like you're having a lot of fun.
I am.
It's always good to do things that you enjoy. And it's safe to say, reading the book, that dance was your piece, your solace. No matter how hard it was to go through training, it still brought gratification to be a part of dance.
Absolutely. And that gratification really gave me the strength and gave me the life skills to get through some of the other. I wanted the book to not be about dance specifically, but have dance as a leitmotif and to show how those skills work, because I've been in very white environments and in white professions that have not had African Americans, let alone women, throughout my life, whether it was as a diplomat in the Foreign Service among some of the first Black women in the US Foreign Service, whether it was in corporate America, whether it was working for Ron Brown, who was the first Black chairman of the Democratic Party and also Secretary of Commerce. And working with him and seeing how he brought people in, and as he said, to leave the ladder down so that others could climb. And I've learned from the best. And I've been able to have such a successful career. And people often look at success and think it's easy. And part of the reason I wrote this book was, as privileged as I have been to be in wonderful positions, to go to Vassar College, to get a master's degree from Johns Hopkins, to travel the world, to work in many places, it has not been easy. And I am really honored and blessed to have had such a multifaceted and successful career. But I wanted people to look at the inside workings of how that happens, how to deal with discrimination, sexism, stereotypes that people put on us as Black folks and as women. Some of the comments, oh, I've always thought of you as white. And to think that that is a compliment.
Right.
Those types of things that one goes through when you are somewhat of a trailblazer and a first.
Yes. Oh my. So diversity, inclusion, you mentioned all those key touch words, racism, sexism, discrimination from your job, working in diverse capacities of your job, and then also in dancing. Have you seen, in your opinion, do you think some has changed? In which way have we changed in our society, especially in our governments, from looking in now, from the time that you were working, do you see any changes going on?
I see change, but I also see backsliding. I think when I look at my career and realize that in 1978, when I was in the Foreign Service and serving in my first tour in the Dominican Republic, that our first class, we called ourselves junior officer trainees. There were more people of color. It was more diverse in 1977, 78 than it has been in recent years.
Wow.
That the numbers of people of color in the Foreign Service, serving as diplomats, serving our country, is still a challenge to have the percentage that we should have. So I look at the Foreign Service and I say, what's happened? Why haven't we achieved those numbers? Now, there are things that the Biden administration is doing. For the first time, there is a diversity and inclusion senior official at the State Department who is trying to work on some of these issues. I, every year, do a mid-career program, largely for Foreign Service officers and people in international affairs agencies of color, where we mentor, we speak. They come for a week to Aspen, Colorado, where they are in an enclosed environment and can focus. And we basically advise them and mentor them. And the stories we hear about their professional environment and the discrimination they have to deal with, and their thoughts, many of them, of leaving the Foreign Service. And we need to have people of color serving our country because of what the richness they bring of experience, of understanding many of the countries in which they work, where there are economic challenges and political challenges. I think that we as people of color bring skills, knowledge, experience that's critical to successful international affairs. So those are some of the things that I've seen. There has been a lot of progress since 1968 when I was in DC and when Martin Luther King died and there were burning down of buildings and the frustration of Black people to see a leader killed at that time. And I was young, but my father made sure that I rode through the streets of downtown DC to see that I went to Resurrection City, where Black folks were sitting in, demanding changes in civil rights. And I know there's been progress, or I wouldn't have had the career that I've had over the last 40 years. The opportunity, even as a trailblazer, to get in the door, because I stand on the shoulders of so many who went before us and did not have those opportunities. But we have a long ways to go. And I think that Black Lives Matter protests have shown us that the tenor and the color of the crowds who protested is very different from 1968 and the 70s.
Yes, it is. Yes.
When it was just Black folks and a few white people, quite a few white people. I don't want to say that there were, but now you have young people of all colors. You had so many young white students and kids out in the streets who understand the need for change. And having that diversity of support, I think, is important. Having younger people approach the world a little differently. So I have a great deal of hope for the future. I think that change, we're on the cusp of major change. And if we could stop the partisanship, oh my goodness, if we could have people come together and work toward voting rights.
Common cause.
I mean, all of these things, but
Yeah.
we have some leaders out there who give us hope among the community of color and others. And I think that we'll get there, even though it's going to take a while longer, but we've made progress since the 60s.
Yeah, I think we have. It is, just hearing you say that, it's kind of discouraging, though, to realize that the numbers are so less in comparison to what it was almost 50 years ago.
That's right.
You know,
and it's not, and that's the case in corporate America and so many places.
So many other places. I mean, you can stop and think about other trailblazing things, such as the movie Hidden Figures. You had these phenomenal sisters who, mathematicians with NASA. And we look now, how many sisters and brothers are mathematicians, let alone working for NASA?
That's right. And we also look at history.
Yeah.
And we look at the 1619 Project.
Yes.
And we look at all of these efforts and the books that have been written by so many people, Cast, Ta-Nehisi Coates. I mean, we are seeing things now that really reevaluate what you and I learned in school.
Yes.
Where we were left out of history. And I know there are debates about critical race theory, all of the things that are going on, but I do think that people's eyes have been opened, many.
Yes.
In conversations that have never been had before, and in history that now is written in books that is not revisionist history where we were left out, but it's the real history that talks about how this country very much was built on the backs of yes. the slaves and Black folks in general.
Exactly.
So, and people, I don't want to leave out others.
Of others, yeah, of course. I mean, we say Black, but of course that includes a lot of indigenous people. Indians where they were used quite a bit for building a lot of skyscrapers because the average person, Black or white, was afraid to climb high in high altitude of a skyscraper. So they use Indians to be able to do that.
And also that indigenous people in this country harbored Black slaves who were on the run.
Yes.
Now they also, some of them held slaves well, and the Trail of Tears included Black folks.
Yes, it did.
And I talk about, I have a lot of indigenous background in my family. So I had to do a lot of research about Indians in this country, and I learned a great deal, but we still have not done right.
No, we have not done. No, we haven't.
No, we haven't. And the numbers, the percentages of Native Americans who are in these positions in corporations in the Foreign Service, they are embarrassingly low.
Very low, yes.
So they have a struggle, and we need to struggle together. We need to unite.
They have a struggle that's far beyond the average person's comprehension.
Yes.
Previous job, I actually worked and sold directly to IHS as well as to pretty much all the reservations. So I had a direct contact, and there's so much plight up on the reservations that the average person does not know and cannot fathom how they live. And that's some of the largest reservations in America.
That's right.
I had an opportunity to visit Navajo Nation and to drive onto the reservation and see people living in almost third world conditions. And they're almost one of the richest reservations, nations in the whole Native American Indian country.
Mm-hmm.
There's over 500 tribes within the United States alone.
Oh, yes.
And to see outhouses on their property, like, I'm confused. But this was
the original. These are Native Americans.
These are Native Americans.
This was their land.
Yes, this is their land. They are true Americans.
Right.
You know, and then, you know, they deal with drug abuse. They deal with alcoholism. They deal with all these things, and they have very little support.
Right.
From the people who removed them from their land.
Absolutely. Yes. And the stereotypes that they have to suffer.
Yes.
It's cultural competence. Again, if we don't understand in this country with whom we're dealing and their circumstance and the environment, then how are we going to have unity?
Yes.
How are we going to have progress when we don't understand among Latinos, Latinx? I know that's a big debate as to how people want to be referred, but that we don't understand the difference between Mexicans and Cubans, or Brazilians and Venezuelans,
Puerto Ricans and Spaniards from Spain.
Exactly. We don't have that basic knowledge in the United States, let alone how are we going to negotiate with the Chinese when we know nothing about the Chinese culture and how people walk into negotiations with certain things that are learned, that are from their experience. So I really am stuck on this whole issue of understanding culture within the US and abroad. And I think actually that artists, because they are so familiar with learning universal language, whether it be dance, whether it be music, theater, that there's a universality of the arts and a creativity and a desire to solve problems and to get past barriers, that artists need to be incorporated more into things like negotiations.
That's a good point.
You know, into cross-cultural communication, reaching out to other countries, not in a confrontational way, but in a way that's understood and shared. So I'm a real proponent of cultural diplomacy.
Yeah, and you make a very good point with that, because so many people a lot of our leaders that sit in Washington have so many biases. They will learn behaviors from their parents or their past, and without really knowing, you need someone to become the bridge, the conduit. Yes. And that's a good point. Artists, musicians, performing artists, they probably could become very good conduits.
Yes.
Mediators.
Right.
Because it can help change the mind and see things from a different color lens.
And I still think that there's not an appreciation within the diplomacy world today of the importance of cultural exchanges, educational exchanges. I was in the Foreign Service under an agency that was called the U.S. Information Agency that focused on cultural exchanges, educational exchanges, the media, television, Voice of America, et cetera. And that was subsumed by the State Department, I think about 20 some years ago. So it's now a division of the State Department, and it's not independent. It doesn't have as much funding. And I don't think that there's as much, that's soft power. They call cultural affairs and those types of things, but they should be taken more seriously, given more funding, and focused on because of what I'm talking about, the universality of art and the importance of education and exposure. So I'm hoping that some of these things will become more apparent, particularly as we've watched artists, performing artists and visual artists deal with the whole pandemic in such a creative way.
Yes.
When you think about what you've seen on Zoom with people performing and all of the classes that artists have taken to stay in shape, and all of the barriers that have been overcome through creative thought and through the discipline and strength and determination, I believe that many artists uniquely have. I know other folks do, but I think it's part of the core of being a performer or being an artist of any type. You have to have that.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. What did you learn from when you wrote from writing this book?
I learned a lot of history of my family. I had to do some research about things I never knew about my family. I didn't know as much about the Native American roots of my family. I knew a little bit about it. I think that Black folks, and I think other people of color, are taught not to talk about the past. Because some of the past from slavery on is so painful that many of our family members, our older family members, don't talk about it. It's difficult for them to talk about the struggles that they've gone through. And so my father, who's 89 and very vibrant, has a great memory.
That's
I spent
awesome.
time talking to my dad. I learned a lot about our family history because he was willing to talk about it. But when I was growing up,
did you record it? Did you record it?
Not only did I recorded it, but now my father is participating in my audiobook.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh,
my
wow.
Father was an actor, among many things.
Yes.
He has a fabulous voice, bass voice. And I recorded him in April of last year when he turned 89. I took him to a studio, a recording studio, and had him read sections of the book. So now I have read the rest of the book. It's in my voice with my father's voice integrated into certain portions. He reads all the
interesting. That ought to be very interesting.
He even sings parts of spirituals.
you just reinvigorated that those juices that started flowing through him. I'm sure that I know that you saw his eyes light up when he started doing it.
Absolutely. He enjoyed doing it. I was just with him a few days ago. And I have it was just edited, the audiobook by a fabulous young man who has recorded and edited this whole book. I haven't gotten it to actually be out yet. I hope perhaps in the first quarter of 2022.
Oh, that'll be awesome.
One of those services, the book.
I have to hear that book.
Just the audiobook.
Yeah, because that's very unusual. Typically you would have one person reading, but to be able to integrate different voices to give the impact of that, it changes the whole dichotomy of what you have.
I hope so.
Yeah, I see that in my mind's eye, especially on those parts where your father was talking and he talked about, the different things. And then I can see that what you say with the poetry.
Yes.
I can see that with the history when the chapter you talked about the family history.
Yes. And also the chapter, he sings verses, just verses from spirituals, because in one of my chapters, I actually include the sheet music and a few lines of lyrics that are relevant to whatever story I'm telling about revelations, because I talk about revelations in my life. And so I have 4 or 5 spirituals, and he actually sings the lyrics.
Wow.
Of those pieces, those spirituals that I included in that chapter of the book.
Well, that's awesome. That should be a great listen just to hear that throughout the book. Yeah. How was you talked about what you learned about the family. How was it difficult? Was it painful? I know your brother really delved deep into embracing his Indian heritage.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes,
And then you
absolutely.
also talked about how the name changed.
Yes,
Also,
because of the Great Migration. They wanted to, part of the family didn't want to spell their name Fitts, that name Fitz, because that's what the southern half of the family, I guess, inherited that name from the slave master. And when they migrated to the north and during the Great Migration, they changed their name to Fitz, maybe symbolic, but representing a new chapter and
mm,
hopefully a new freedom. Now we know that the North wasn't
it would
absolutely
always free.
free, but I think it was symbolic for them. Yes, there were many things that I was able to explore. It was a pleasure. It was not painful at all. It was wonderful to be able to talk to family members. I have a lot of photos in the book,
Yes.
and to be able to get those photos from family members. And there's one from 1918 where the photographer Ed Jones, who was fabulous in
Oh, yes. That the
touching
family
up
that
these photos, right, of the
is a
car.
family. Yes. And there was another one also I remember seeing. It was like a family photo of about, I guess, about a few standing out in front of a house or something. Is
That's
about,
it. That's the
yeah,
one. The photo,
yes,
there's a car, an old car in the back, and
yes,
then there's the home. And Ed, whose father was a photographer, and he also is a fabulous photographer, said to me, he says, Lauri, it's rare that there is a photo like that
it is
from
rare.
1918 of a Black family.
Yes.
He said, because it just didn't happen. People didn't have access to a stage. I mean, there was someone who took that photograph. So
Hmm.
it really was a stage to a certain extent, like you go to a studio and you take,
Right.
but to have that photo from 1918, he says, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So he was really, so he did a lot of work on being sure that he touched up in every
In the
way
right
he
areas.
could.
Yes.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
And it was in pretty good condition. Even considering that he did the touch up, you could still make out. And to know photography at that time, you really had to almost hold your breath to take a picture
right,
because they had to keep the aperture open so long to
right,
capture the light.
right,
Otherwise, you've seen those pictures where you can see kind of a little where someone kind of shook and the eyes were out of focus. But
right.
that was really you have quite a few pictures throughout the book, which I think was good how they represent the chapters. They kind of give you a snippet, a quick glimpse of what took place and what these pictures represent based upon those chapters.
Absolutely. And I have to give Ed a lot of credit. He spent hours and hours with those photos to make sure that they were as clear and as perfect as they could be in the book. So yes, and that's why I call this kind of a multimedia book. You have visuals, you
Yes.
have poetry, you have music, and so I wanted it, as I said, to be a creative memoir. And I'm glad that the photography, the cover of the book is a statue, is a sculpture that is by a Black sculptress artist. Her name is Tina Allen.
Yes.
And that's and I own that fabulous sculpture, which is three
Wow.
feet there, and it sits on a 3-foot pedestal. So it's 6 feet. And that's
Wow.
a pride, that's a pride piece of art. I love art. But to have that piece from a Black sculptor, Tina Allen, who died unfortunately a few years ago. She has
Mhm.
beautiful work. So wherever I go, that's right featured in whatever home I'm in. I try to get to carry that sculpture all over the place whenever I move.
Exactly. You have to keep it and representing our culture, artists in all forms and mediums, sculptors, painters, singers, writers, poets, dancers. We have to represent and support in all ways.
Absolutely. And I hope I've done a little bit of justice to all of those folks in this book,
You
because
have.
they so deserve recognition and appreciation for their hard work, often under difficult circumstances of being accepted and recognized.
Yeah, various times of our life, of course. Since you wrote this book, and what could you tell the young brother or sister who want to write? What words of advice could you give them to write their book, whatever it might be?
I think the importance of our stories is becoming more apparent as we're seeing more people writing and speaking about their experiences, and trying to make sure that history, that current environment is portrayed and communicated and represented. We won't have change in this country or in the world unless our stories are told by us, because our stories have been told by others, and maybe not too accurately, over the decades and centuries. So it's our responsibility, frankly, to tell our stories, to write our stories, to speak our stories. And what's been so gratifying to me, the book came out at the end of September, so it's only been out a few months, is the feedback that I get from social media, from speaking. I've done probably a good dozen speaking engagements or book launch parties, where I've been able to have people come together, even during COVID. I've had in-person and very well-controlled protocols for vaccination and masking and all those things. And people have met each other who are part of my life, but different parts of my life, who'd never met each other before. There are people who've read the book and have written to me saying, I knew so-and-so. I had no idea you knew that person. I've had young people come to me and say, this has really impacted my life. You
Wow.
have changed things for me. You've opened doors for me. You've explained to me how this could happen. There's a young dancer, Black dancer, who's fabulous. I'll leave her unnamed, who is dancing in Europe, with whom I've established a wonderful relationship since she was introduced to me by a fellow author, a Black author. So it's a long story, but I met her and she's 23 years old and she's performing in a white company in Europe.
Mm.
And we have had conversations where she has said to me, you're really the first person that I have talked to who understands what I'm going through.
Wow.
And brought tears to my eyes. To
Wow.
hear young people say that to me, because I wrote about it. It's not that there aren't other people out there who have had
That's
similar
true.
experiences, but she read it, she's seen it. That's why our stories are so important to write down.
So true. That's very true.
Yes.
And that's amazing. 23 years old, and you're saying that she's experiencing some of those same things that you wrote about, that you experienced 30 plus years ago.
You're being generous.
Yeah.
40, 50 years ago. You're being very generous.
Yes. Yeah, I am. Tell me, what about 3 people in your industry that inspired you, but also shares the same vision that you have when it comes to dancing?
Oh, wow. In my industry, when you say in my industry, I didn't know if you meant diplomacy
no,
dance.
it's in dance.
Okay.
Yes.
I will say that closest to me and people that I'm working with regularly include Sandra Fortune Green, who now, carries the legacy of Doris Jones and Claire Haywood, who formed the school in 41. That's 3 there, but I will look at some of the younger people. The Dance Institute of Washington here in DC is run by a young woman named Kahina Haynes. She's in her 30s. And she definitely has the vision and she's implementing it. She's got, 80 some students. It's in a community that's a community of color in Washington, DC. All of her students are students of color, or at least,
Large percentage
they're
of it.
large percent, a really large percentage. And she has that holistic approach to these students. She has speakers, she has education space for them. She feeds them, and they take dance classes and perform. So all of those things that she's doing, I really admire her because she is the future and she has that vision that she's implemented. She also is very data focused on results and looking at what changes have occurred. She has a theory of change that she basically implements in her work. And we are working together on this conference with the Canadian Ballet. And I really applaud schools like the Canadian Ballet School, which does not have a perfect history in this regard, has had, people I know, people of color who've been there, who actually are speaking at this symposium, who have been at the Canadian Ballet School and have not had great experiences. But this is an opportunity for truth, authenticity, and how people are speaking about issues of discrimination in this genre, which has been at the pinnacle because it's a European form, genre of dance. Ballet, we can look at jazz, we can look at African dance, we can look at hip hop, other dance forms that are not so much excluding people of color. They come from folks of color. They were created by folks of color. But ballet, not quite
exclusiveness. Yes. There was one part I read, and I didn't realize it in the book, that I didn't realize that dancers, at a time, the intent was that you had to buy leotards that matched the complexion of your skin.
Now we can. When I was growing up, it was pink tights.
That's all I remember seeing growing up was pink or black. It was pink,
pink tights. And this is something that I also think is critical. We now have, thank goodness, the tights, which are on the legs. And when I say tights, I don't know if people know what I'm talking about. What's up top is usually called a leotard, but covering your legs. And your shoes can now come in the flesh tone. So if you're a little brown dancer, you don't have to wear those pink tights, which really they were created to the closest match to Caucasian skin. That's why they're pink.
Exactly.
Or it's a pale pink, but it was an effort to match the skin color of white dancers. So if you're a Black dancer and you were wearing pink tights and you're wearing pink shoes, ballet slippers or point shoes, it really aesthetically, it disturbs the line of your body, your legs, and it really breaks up the line because it goes from whatever you're wearing up top, and your legs naturally are brown or some shade of brown, and you have on these pink tights and these pink shoes. So now the aesthetic of it, the line is extended and it's more beautiful because it's a continuous line of what your color is. And so it's just wonderful. And when I was growing up, I didn't have that opportunity. None of the dancers of my era, all we had were pink tights.
Yes.
And pink shoes.
I remember all those my cousins going to see their performances. All I remember seeing is the black leotards and pink tights.
That's right. And that's, someone, I was speaking to a teacher about this at a school, a white teacher at a school. And we were having this discussion and I said, they said, well, the kids have seen dancers that have pink tights and Black kids want to wear pink tights. Many Black dancers they have no problem with wearing pink tights. I said, well, why is it they have no problem? Is it because that's the only thing they've ever seen?
Right.
Is
You
it
have to give them
because
options.
they're afraid to express to their artistic director, I'd like to wear flesh tone tights instead of pink tights when I'm dancing in the corps de ballet or I'm a principal dancer, because there's been this desire for uniformity in ballet. Everybody has to look the same. And this is one of the excuses that white companies and white ballet schools have used in terms of performance. Well, the corps, meaning the group, not the principals, but the corps de ballet, as they call it, it has to look the same. How are you going to put somebody in there who has a black face when everybody else has white faces? And you're supposed to dance in unison and you're supposed to look the same.
Right.
Well, guess what?
The
It's
flow is
time for
broken.
change. That's right. No, but the flow will not be broken if people technically are performing at the same level,
Yeah.
have the same. And a lot of these ballets were written where there were black roles. There's stories like in Le Corsaire, which is about slavery. And guess who played the roles of the black slaves? Black
Oh, wow.
face.
Yes. A
White
black
man.
face white person.
Yes. So, we have to look back and provide, why does Clara in the Nutcracker have to be white? Black folks celebrate Christmas too, and
Right.
Kwanzaa, and all kinds of things.
And look how many years it took for that to finally happen.
Yes.
As all the years that Nutcracker has performed in New York and around the country, but of course, New York is always the epicenter for performances. And here it is, 2021 is the first time you had a principal dancer as the lead character for the Nutcracker.
Yes, who was of color. Absolutely.
Yes, of color.
Yes,
That's correct.
it has happened in some of the smaller companies. The Richmond Ballet has had Black Claras playing the principal role in the Nutcracker, and there have been adaptations of the Nutcracker.
Yes, it has. Yes,
to Kwanzaa.
Yes,
and so the Dance Institute of Washington has a Kwanzaa ballet at the holiday time. So we're getting there. We're changing the waterfront in many ways by really demanding that there be change and equity and inclusion.
That's awesome. The takeaway for what do you want? If you can give me your elevator pitch as to what the reader should take away from this book, what would be the one thing that they need to take away from it?
This is a story that has universal meaning. It has resonance for anyone. There is something in this book that everyone can take away and identify with, whether you're an 84-year-old white woman from my church, or whether you are a male, a white male, whether you are a male of color. It's not a book just for women. It's not just a book for people of color. It has universal themes and hopefully is told in an interesting and creative way.
Awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, we have been talking with the author, Lauri Fitz-Pegado, for a new book, Dancing in the Dash. It is currently available at blackbookstore.com. Please take an opportunity to pick it up and read it for yourself. Lauri, I thank you for this opportunity to talk with you. I enjoyed this conversation. Before we leave, is there any closing that you would like to say? And also, please give everyone your social media or any way they can follow you through the internet.
I am on all social media. You can find me, Lauri Fitz-Pegado, at Lauri Fitz-Pegado, on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. And my website is inthedash.live. And I will say my message is we all have a story and a responsibility to tell that story. So please write, talk, engage with everyone so that we can have some change come about in this country and in the world, and that unity will come.
Yes.
Blessings to all.
Well said. Lauri, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your book. thank you for your creativity. Continue being creative, inspiring young minds. Continue writing. I hope to see more writings from you in the near future as well. So thank you for all that you have done, and continue being creative. Make it a great day.
Thank you, Tigner, for all you do, because this is so important. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.